So I wanted to talk about the question of whether euthanasia is ethical or not, but I think it's a good springboard to talk about a few more, meta-ethical topics or just meta-philosophical topics, really, about the nature of debate and argument and disagreement. Um, so before I get into euthanasia, I think it's a good idea to realize that when people are usually interested in these things, if it's not for cynical reasons like just wanting to be right or just using the issue to gain virtue points or political power, if you honestly are just coming at it from the perspective of I think this is the right thing and here's why, I think we generally need to give people the benefit of the doubt and assume they're not evil, right? It usually comes down to two things. Either two people have conflicting virtues, basically a fundamental disagreement of values, which it's unfortunate most people just can't get down to this quickly and realize that that's the issue, and there's very little to do about it. There's some to do about it, but people don't even recognize that as the issue usually. Or you agree on your values, which is kind of rare, but you still disagree about how to best achieve these values, which is I think and there's a lot of overlap here with the conflicting of values. So and it isn't that people's values absolutely conflict. It's just often one person has more emphasis on one value versus another. One of the best examples, I'll do another video on this later, is illegal immigration. One value is compassion, altruism, empathy, mercy, wanting to help these people, whether they're refugees or they're just economically downtrodden and we want to help them, versus the desire to want to keep your country safe, your family safe, and the sense of justice that they're breaking the law and other people did it the right way. And so you can see these two conflicting virtues or values, and it's generally people, if we give them the benefit of the doubt and they're not doing it to be egotistical or gain power, we can just see people basically disagreeing on their emphasis of which to value more, compassion or justice. And you'll see this a lot once you're aware of it, I think. When you disagree with someone, it comes down to one of these fundamental disagreements in values, or how to achieve the values. So this is really relevant, I think, to the euthanasia debate, because it has a lot to do with what the ultimate nature or goal of medicine should be. Should it be to protect and preserve and value life above all else, or should it be to alleviate suffering, which is generally the basis of a lot of ethical systems, especially secular ones that rely on utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is the idea that you can make moral calculations about pleasure or pain or suffering or happiness, and based on those calculations you can arrive at a good moral choice. So it's a subclass of consequentialism, where you make choices based on what's going to happen in the future. So it seems when you hear it for the first time, it just seems so obvious. Isn't that what we're always doing? But there really is another approach where you take a very principled approach, and there's a slightly different approach where you take a kind of a virtue ethics approach, where if you have certain virtues like justice, what would you do in this situation? Or if you have certain principles like you should never lie or never kill an innocent person, then these override your utilitarian concerns. And it can get kind of confusing too, because they all overlap. And sometimes utilitarians will make principled arguments because you should follow a certain principle because it will ultimately lead to a better outcome. And principled people can make utilitarian arguments in a similar vein. So all the meta ethics there can get kind of confusing. But these are the two major approaches to ethical questions. And so someone coming down on the alleviate suffering side of the argument for medicine, and in the particular case of euthanasia, is usually coming at it from a consequentialist, utilitarian, alleviate the most suffering approach. And a person coming from the other side tends to be more religious, tends to view things in a principled way. This roughly corresponds to the left and right of the political spectrum. One is more utilitarian, one is more principled. And I honestly think you should never ever be one or the other. You have to combine the two, and that's a whole other topic in and of itself. If you're purely utilitarian, you arrive at ridiculous conclusions sometimes, like you should abort Down syndrome babies because they're going to suffer, and you don't have a principle of not valuing life, so that's a real problem. Or you could torture somebody in order to make 1,000 people happy. You torture one person, so it's just a moral calculation, which obviously is wrong as well. And if you're purely principled, maybe you say never lie, and in which case you might give up the Jews you're hiding in your basement to the Nazis, right? That's the classic example of a case where you obviously should lie. Or or the famous trolley problem. Maybe you refuse to flip the switch and actively kill somebody, even though it would save 5 lives. That's a whole other topic. But sometimes I think it's justifiable to kill one person to save 5. Although it's a very tricky situation, and it's all based on the circumstances and the context, and it involves both principled and utilitarian approaches to I think really arrive at a rational answer and an intuitive answer. So you have to look at both. And so focusing back now on the euthanasia question, so should medicine value the alleviation of suffering more or the preservation of life more? Depending on where you come down on that is probably where you're going to have your answer. And this really does come down to a fundamental disagreement of values, where you place this emphasis. I come down on the alleviate suffering side. I'm not a utilitarian purely. Like I said, I think that's crazy, but obviously it plays the biggest role. If you're keeping someone alive just for their own sake, let's just take an extreme example. Somebody's burning alive. Would it be ethical to keep them alive for another 10, 15 minutes? Sometimes it can take even longer, depending on certain things, and experience that pain, or would it be ethical to kill them? Obviously, it's ethical to kill them if you can't save them. So that should be obvious to everybody. And if that case works, and if mercy killings are allowed in these situations, then obviously we're looking at a spectrum here where in some situations, if the pain is severe enough and the end of your life is soon enough, ending it quickly and painlessly is the obvious choice. To me, it seems so obvious that it shouldn't even be a debate in a lot of cases. I think, again, where the people on the other side come from, and this is again a whole other video, is a slippery slope argument. If we start, not valuing life enough, suddenly, old people are voluntarily dying, even though they will still have quality of life, as to not be a burden. Maybe eventually it gets turned into a law or a Soylent Green type situation where we're killing the elderly or the infirm. It can reach a point of eugenics or Nazi proportions where we're killing the weak and culling the weak. I don't think a slippery slope argument is enough to keep someone in pain and not allow them to have control over their own life and end their own suffering if they choose to do so. And if another human being chooses to help them, I'm sorry, slippery slopes are important to look at, but a hypothetical slippery slope is not enough to convince me that people don't have the right to control their own life and to control their own suffering, and other people have the right to help them if they so consent. I feel pretty strongly about this one, and it's been obvious to me my whole life, and I really do try hard to see the other side of it, though, and understand that there is just a kind of fundamental difference in values that has to do with sometimes has to do with religion, or believing in a soul, or believing it's very strongly in principles, whether it's based on religion or not. And I don't demonize the people who disagree here. I understand where they're coming from. I just think they're wrong, and I would like my side to win out. But I'm aware of the slippery slope too. I don't want to descend into a society that is willing to kill the weak, or even encourage the weak to volunteer for this kind of thing. That's sick and disgusting too. So I think it isn't hard to find a middle ground here, and we just need to be very careful not to demonize each other, especially when it's obvious that both sides are coming from a genuine moral place, and not a place of self-interested motivation like political power or ego. So that's my take on it. I appreciate any comments, and thanks for listening.